folks, how you doing? It's Sunday, the 27th of April, 2025, and coming to you live from northern Israel. We'll talk about crypto and the alt market in general. I'll mention some specifics, some crazy altcoins to help you get your bloodline all padded and taken care of so that you leave behind a better world for those who come after you, meaning your progeny, not the authorities. If that's your case, can't help you there. Get a good lawyer or an accountant or something. But those who follow in your footsteps, and if they're not detectives or other authority figures who might bring the law down upon you, well, maybe they will, but you still have to know what it is that you need to know and do in this wide world of Bitcoin and crypto. Now, who am I and why am I talking about this? Well, I don't know if you know this. What's the expression? I am just a guy on the internet who's been around for a little while, and I've been talking about crypto stuff for a very long time. And in fact, turns out I was back when I used to mine Bitcoin, and you would think, why would you stop mining if you did it in the past? Well, reasons. But once upon a time, I mined way in the early days. It was among the earlier ones, among the earliest ones. And then for reasons, I had to stop. But anyway, I've been into cryptography for decades and decades, long before Bitcoin ever existed. And to me, digital cash was never a thing that I thought would never happen. It was always a thing I was working on getting done. And then Satoshi came along, published the white paper, and then turned on the network a few months later. And here we are today. So he solved the problem that many people were working on in different ways. And yeah, I was one of those people working on some kind of a solution, but it never, it wasn't scalable. So Bitcoin found that solution and made it possible. And then many altcoins found that solution and made it possible. And in so doing, right, Bitcoin and crypto have actually, the title of the video is Bitcoin and Crypto Change Finance. So be ready. They changed finance forever. So be ready. The fact is, they've actually changed it already. So you really need to be ready. What do I mean by they've changed finance? Well, again, look at who is currently buying all the Bitcoin they can and all the Ethereum they can, and all the leading coins that are in the strategic digital reserve of the United States, which is Ethereum, Solana, XRP, Cardano, and of course there's the Bitcoin reserve, standalone Bitcoin reserve by itself. Who's buying all those assets right now? So, is it retail holders buying the majority of it? No, it's not. Is it institutional holders like banks, central banks, massive whales, governments? Yeah, it is. Things like that, right? Huge companies, yeah. Companies like Strategy, companies like MetaPlanet or whatever they're called. Is it MetaPlanet? Right? There's tons of companies. Every day we hear about another 3 to 5 companies that bought hundreds of Bitcoin, right? Every day we hear this company bought 50, this company bought 100, that company bought 300. Then every week you'll hear like, oh, Strategy bought another 5,000 Bitcoin or whatever, right? And then we hear, things like BlackRock now controls 3% of all the Bitcoin, because of their ETFs and everything. And remember, yes, they issue ETFs, but they own the underlying to back those ETFs, right? And when they pay people cash out, they don't pay them in Bitcoin, right? If you buy a Bitcoin ETF, let's say you buy one Bitcoin from BlackRock as an ETF, okay? You're not actually getting the Bitcoin, right? You know that. You're getting an ETF for a Bitcoin, which is kind of like an IOU. It says they owe you the equivalent of one Bitcoin, right? And whatever that goes up or down, doesn't matter. At some point, you decide to sell. At some point, you decide to sell, right? Maybe you sell at a profit, maybe you sell at a loss, maybe you sell at break even. Doesn't matter. For the point of this example, doesn't matter. When you cash out, you literally cash out. They don't give you a Bitcoin, they give you the cash equivalent, meaning they keep the difference. So if it went up, they made a profit because they bought, right? They had to have a Bitcoin to back your Bitcoin ETF. That's a requirement. They have to have the underlying asset to back the ETFs they issue, right? So if they've bought whatever it is, $10 billion worth of Bitcoin, right? They can issue those $10 billion worth of Bitcoin ETFs and they're all backed one to one, right? And it's not like a bank where the bank can spend your dollar like 112 times on average, right? Like for every dollar you give them, they can spend it 112 times or whatever the number is. Say 100 for round numbers, which is insane if you think about it. When banks first started working under the Federal Reserve System in the United States, they could lend your dollar out 5-10 times, right? But not more than that. That was considered a lot. And then it got up to be like 20 times is the norm. And then it got up to be 40 times. And then it got up to be 60 times. And then it got up to be 80 and then 100. And now it's literally more than 100 times. For every dollar you have in a bank, they're using that money more than 100 times. Right? Meaning they're using the equivalent of that money more than 100x. So if you put in $1 in your bank, they're spending $100 based on that $1. Think about how crazy that is. That's the current fiat system. And the current fiat system also has these ETFs in it that are regulated slightly differently than the banks have the 100 to 1 spend, right? They have to back the asset that they're selling, which is ETFs, with the underlying asset, which is the Bitcoin, right? Or the Ethereum, whichever ETF they're selling, right? In those two cases. That way, when you cash out, it's guaranteed that they'll have the money for it because they'll have the money at the market rate, right? But if they bought the asset, but believe me, they have the money anyway, right? They don't need to sell their Bitcoin to give you that money. They keep the Bitcoin, and then they sell it to you, and they can still keep that Bitcoin, and then they can resell that same ETF to someone else for that same Bitcoin, and ta-da! Now they've made money because every time somebody buys and sells a Bitcoin from them, they pay a service fee, right? And those little service fees add up, and over time, the service fees make up quite a little difference in the amount of money they spent on their Bitcoin versus the amount of money that they get paid on service fees, right? Plus, if the value of Bitcoin goes up long term, which they obviously think it will, or they wouldn't be so interested in issuing ETFs, right? They wouldn't be issuing ETFs. They wouldn't be buying the underlying asset. They wouldn't be holding 3% of all potential Bitcoins ever, right? If they didn't care about the price of Bitcoin, they wouldn't hold all these things, but they obviously do. So if they believe the price of the asset will continue to go up over time, then the assets that they bought on the cheap end, like under 150,000, when the asset goes to above 150,000, they will have made a tidy profit on it. And they don't have to sell it; they could just keep holding it, right? And remember, Bitcoin is a property in the United States, right? It's perceived as property. What does that mean? It means there's no capital gains tax on it when you don't cash it out, right? They're not taking profit on it. It's just a property. It's just a piece of property. So whatever they're holding, whatever it's worth, is what it's worth. They're just sitting on massive profits when it's profitable. And if you think they're paying market rates when they're buying 100 Bitcoin or 1,000 Bitcoin at a time, you don't know how this operates. They're not paying market rates. They're paying usually below what the market is paying, okay, right? Because they can. Now, when there are slim pickings, and increasingly there are slim pickings, and there's competition between the buyers who are buying over the counter, meaning not on the books of the exchanges. They're buying directly from miners or other whales who are like, you know what, hell, I'll sell my Bitcoins. They just want to, cash out and get wealthy, right? Like they want cash wealth or whatever, for whatever reason. Who knows, maybe they want to buy the next yacht or something. Well, they're buying it, even if they're competing for it, and they will buy it at a premium, right? They will buy it at a premium, but they're going to do it in a way that it doesn't affect the market price. Meaning they're going to buy it over the counter. So when even when they offer a premium, it's still expected that they're going to get some kind of a discount for buying, in significant numbers. Well, how do they justify this? How can they do that? Well, because if a whale, let's say, has 5,000 Bitcoins that he wants to sell, he's got like maybe 50,000 Bitcoins in total and he wants to sell 5,000 of them, okay? You can't just go on the open market and dump them all because there'll be slippage on the price. Now, it'll be gobbled up quickly, right? Relatively, probably, by the exchanges and by whoever else is buying, right? It'll be gobbled up pretty quickly, but he'll still have slippage. He might lose 10, 20, 30% of his profits, right? It's possible. He might only lose 0.5% or no percent, but he might lose a significant amount. It happens all the time. It's called slippage, right? If you're dumping more coins on an exchange than there are buyers for it, well, what are you going to do, right? So to sell 5,000 Bitcoin or even 500 Bitcoin all at once is not so easy. It's going to take your time and effort and planning and strategy, and labor and costs. So if a buyer comes to you and says, hey, listen, I'm willing to pay you a bit of a premium to sell these things to me, but I want to buy a whole bunch of them, so give me a discount. Which you can think, wait, how are you paying him a premium if there's a discount? Well, he's paying you a premium in the sense that he'll pay you more than the other competitors who will buy it from him, but you're going to buy more of them from him than the competitors who want to buy from him. Like in bulk, you'll help him buy. You'll buy all 5,000 from him, right? But off the books, over the counter, so it doesn't affect the market price. So you're getting it at a price that's cheaper than if he was to sell them on the market and you were to buy them with no slippage, but it's more than if you were to sell it on the market and there was slippage. And the seller knows that, which is exactly how these whales control the market. People always ask, how do they know how to control the market? Well, they know because this is the business they're in. They're in the business of, right, buying and selling significant numbers of assets, not on the open exchanges, right, but between private buyers. Now, very often it's the exchanges that have over-the-counter desks. So like you might go to Binance and trade on their open exchange, right, for like their common market for everybody to be able to buy and sell on. But if you want to buy and sell a heck ton of Bitcoins, say you want to buy 100 Bitcoins or 1,000 Bitcoins from them, you wouldn't do that on their exchange unless you're mad, right? Unless you've lost your mind completely, because you would cause your own price to go up significantly by doing that. You would cost yourself more money. Instead, you're going to go to the exchange, say like, "Hey, I'd like to buy, a huge amount OTC over the counter," and then they can offer you that service. And again, most of these exchanges have that service, right? And they're happy to oblige. And so again, they'll charge you a premium and they'll give you a discount at the same time, right? The premium is they'll charge you a little bit more per Bitcoin than you might get it if there was no slippage, but because there is slippage on exchanges, so they adjust for that when you buy in bulk, and they say, okay, we'll give you a discount so that it's better for the seller, meaning the exchange, because they're usually the ones who hold the coins, right? It's better for the exchanges who give a bit of a discount on the bulk purchases for buying in bulk. Because again, whoever's selling it knows they would lose money on slippage if they sold in bulk. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, the future of finance has changed forever. Be ready, right? Like, it literally has happened. It's not, is it going to happen? It's not, when will it happen? No. The future of finance has changed. And it is going to never be the same. And I say that with absolute confidence because, well, look at the world around you. Look at the market. All the biggest, wealthiest organizations in the world are buying up all the Bitcoin that they can get. That is not an accident. All the biggest governments, all the biggest banks, all the biggest whales, they're all buying as much as they can get. That is not an accident. And the more they buy, and the more they kick you out of your position, the happier they are because you have less of it and they have more. And they want to secure the future of their finance forever. And they see that owning all the Bitcoin and all the other top ETFs and on all the top cryptos is their obvious path to success. So it's a money grab, quite literally. Right now, they're being sold money for very cheap by the miners, right? And when I say very cheap, I mean historically low prices compared to where these assets will be 10, 20 years. But somebody gives you lemons, like my lemon tree, make lemonade. What do you think about this big fat orange? Lemon. Orange. Big fat lemon. Straight from the lemon tree. And then it's little, here's the Litecoin to the other lemon. The other lemon is Bitcoin. This is the Litecoin. So yeah, those are the plain simple facts about how the financial markets are changing forever. People are going to be one day in the not very distant future, whether you like it or not. Again, I don't care if you think Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme. You shouldn't care either, because it doesn't matter if you think it's a Ponzi scheme. It is literally the future of finance. And you can laugh and say, oh, you're funny, you're ridiculous, it'll never be the future of finance, it doesn't have enough transactions per second. If you think that's what's going to hold it back, you don't understand Bitcoin. You really don't understand Bitcoin. This thing is being bought by the wealthiest organizations and people on the planet, including the top governments in the world and the wealthiest governments in the world. the US dollar is not going to be replaced by the BRICS, whatever the hell they call their silly pretend currency. The US dollar is going to be replaced by Bitcoin. If you think that's a joke, good for you, but it's not. Why else would the US be creating a strategic digital reserve of Bitcoin? And you can say, what are you talking about? They have a strategic oil reserve and we don't all use oil. Oh, wait, we do. What are you talking about? They have a strategic cheese reserve. We don't all eat cheese. Oh, wait. Most people do. Oh, wait, they have a strategic nuclear reserve. We don't use nuclear. Oh. You starting to see what I'm saying here? The US does use nuclear power. Even when it doesn't blow anything up, it's using its nuclear power. They don't have to use their Bitcoin to be able to issue a Bitcoin-backed dollar or a Bitcoin-backed currency of a new type, or just to enrich the US Treasury so that they can continue issuing dollars and saying that the government has money to insure all of its debts. Because what is it that backs the US dollar? It's the full faith and credit of the United States government. Well, how much faith and credit do they have right now in the world if they don't have any money to pay their debts? Considering that they have such huge debts, right? More than $30 trillion. Can they print their way out of it? Sure, in theory, the US can just print its way out of debt. But then what happens to that dollar? Let's say the US just decides, you know what, we're just going to print $30 trillion to get our way out of debt right now. So we're not going to have any more debt. We'll pay it off. And on top of that, we're going to print another 20 trillion just to pass around the hat and make sure everybody's got some change. Okay? What do you think is going to happen to the dollar? Like, seriously, what do you think would happen to the dollar if there was suddenly an additional $50 trillion on the market? What do you think would happen? I think we both know what would happen. Right? If you don't know what would happen, you should really take an economics course. An economics course. A financial education course. Because what would happen if you suddenly have $50 trillion, like if you have more than the entire supply of dollars suddenly appearing on the market, or I should say, more than the entire debt amount suddenly appear on the market, or even if you just had the debt amount appear on the market suddenly, like an additional $30 trillion, and there was no more U.S. government debt, do you realize what would happen to that dollar? It would go very low. It would not have a lot of purchasing power. The strength of the dollar would fall mightily. And governments know this, which is why they don't tend to overprint their money. Obviously, some governments do overprint their money, and those that do have suffered the consequences, which is another reason why governments don't tend to do this, because they know the consequences are bad. Right? They don't want to end up like Zimbabwe after Mugabe got rid of all the white farmers. They don't want to end up like Germany after World War I. Right? They want to have a stable economy. They want to have a stable currency. They want to have a stable coin. Well, Bitcoin's not a stable coin, but compared to extremely volatile currencies, it certainly can be. For example, compared to the Venezuelan economy and its currency over the past 15 years, right? Bitcoin has been seen as a safe, stable coin relatively to the Venezuelan currency. Think about how crazy that is. The most volatile asset on the market, Bitcoin, is considered more stable than a fiat currency of a national government of a country that was once the wealthiest country in all of South America. Think about how messed up that is. Like literally, Venezuela once had the most amount of money in terms of national treasure out of any country in South America because of oil. Right? They have massive amounts of oil. And yet today, they're one of the poorest, if not the poorest. Well, they're not the poorest, but they're one of the poorest for sure countries in South America. You can arguably say, well, they are the poorest because of the amount of loss proportional to where they were, etc. You can make the case, but they're not actually the poorest. But still, they're extremely, extremely poor overall in South America compared to what they used to be. Right? There's no question about that. Venezuela has suffered tremendous amounts of financial loss in the past 15 years, like massive, right? And it's very sad because they're a country that has massive amounts of natural resources that are just managed extremely poorly and has destroyed their entire economy. And it's a real shame, but that's what you have. That's the reality, right? I wish that it were different, but it is not. So what's the solution to that? Well, in Venezuela, the solution to that for years has already been mine Bitcoin, buy Bitcoin, hold Bitcoin. Because when your silly Venezuelan currency isn't worth anything, at least if you have Bitcoin, then you have an asset that has value, right? And that value keeps going up over time relative to the other assets on the market. Anyway, so you can see the future of finance is already being implemented in different countries. Look at El Salvador. Why did El Salvador legalize Bitcoin as a currency in their country? Think about that. Why would a South American country that had one of the highest crime rates of all, it had, I think, the highest crime rate in South America for a time, right? Like the highest murder rate, it was the murder capital of the world, right? With San Salvador, I think, for some years. And then what happened? They put in this, President Bukele guy, Nayib Bukele, a very young, charismatic at the time president. A lot of people liked his message. We're going to clean up the government. I just need to be a little bit more authoritarian than most, but don't worry, I won't be an evil dictator, and I'll just get rid of the bad guys. Well, has he delivered on his promise? Well, some people say yes. Obviously, some people say no. That's the beauty of a democracy, which they kind of have because they did vote for him. And has he cleaned up the street? Well, Bitcoin, apart from Bitcoin being legal tender there, right? The government of El Salvador has now reached a point where the country has the lowest crime rate in South America, or Central America, whatever, right? Has the lowest crime rate, from the highest to the lowest. And at the same time, he legalized Bitcoin for all transactions. That doesn't mean that every vendor, every merchant actually accepts Bitcoin. No, because they don't all have the technology. Maybe they don't have the wallets. They don't have point of sales. They don't have whatever tools they might need. Okay, but legally speaking, if a customer insists on paying in Bitcoin, technically speaking, the customer has the right to pay in Bitcoin. And if they can find some way to do it, they can do it. It's just a matter of whether or not the vendor will actually be able to accept that money, because if they don't have a way to accept the money, well, they can't accept the money, obviously, right? But increasingly, vendors are. And yes, I know there's been a bunch of vendors who stopped accepting Bitcoin in Salvador in recent months and over the past couple of years. But overall, it is actually still gaining popularity, right? And by the way, every time you see a dip in the market, you will always see stories about, oh, El Salvador vendors are stopping to accept Bitcoin. It's not true, right? More and more of them are accepting it every day, meaning more and more shops are complying with regulations every day. Why? Well, because people like making money, and they're not stupid people in El Salvador. They're people just like people everywhere. They have brains too, and they understand that Bitcoin has significant value, and that it is likely to have more significant value over time. And they understand that it's the future of finance, because it's bloody obvious to them. They see it, right? They see that people who had Bitcoin 5 years ago had an asset that was worth as low as $3,000 during the COVID thing, and now it's 90 something $1,000, and it was over $100,000 only a couple months ago. So we're talking an asset that's gone 30x or more just in the last 5 years. Doesn't take a mathematician to figure out that that's a good thing. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand those numbers. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that this asset came from 0 to over 100K in 16 years. And as such, it ended up getting like more than 16 or whatever, 15 billion% in returns or something crazy. 13, 14, 15 billion, whatever the number is, some insane number of billions of percent returns. What other asset can say it has delivered more than 10 billion% returns in 16 years? Like literally none is the answer. Right? Which, by the way, when you see altcoins marketing themselves, oh, we're the new solution, we're the next best thing, we're going to be the next greatest altcoin, ask yourself, why don't they start at 0? Why doesn't anybody else pull the Bitcoin model? You always hear the excuse, oh, nobody can pull the same Bitcoin model again. It's one and done. Really? Is it one and done, or is it that people are just grotesquely insecure and egotistical and arrogant, and so they will do whatever they can to money grab, and they don't want to set their new shiny baby up for sale at 0? Bitcoin cost nothing when it was created. Cost literally nothing. If you wanted to buy a Bitcoin, it cost you nothing. You would barter it, you would swap it with people. You couldn't buy it really, right? You had to barter it. The initial purchases of Bitcoin weren't for money, right? I was purchasing content and computer fans and little tiny chips and tiny little computer parts, LED lights, maybe a little bit of software here and there for Bitcoins in the very, very early days, before the pizza. Okay, before the pizza. The pizza day was considered a big deal, not because it was the first transaction for Bitcoin, not because it was the first purchase of something for Bitcoin. It wasn't the first purchase of something for Bitcoin. People who think it was are mistaken. It was the first time that a kind of big brand retail company had accepted Bitcoin as a payment for a good or a service. Right? It wasn't the first time somebody bought something with Bitcoin, not even close. Right? But it was the first time that a big recognized company had accepted Bitcoin for payment for something that they sold. That's all. Right? With Little Caesar's Pizza or whatever. So, anyway, guys, we're going to get rolling. Talk with you guys later. Remember, Bitcoin and crypto have already changed the financial world forever. So you might as well, if you don't already have any, you might as well learn about it. Even if you don't want to buy it, I'm telling you, you will be using it one day. Mark my words, whether you like it or not, you will be using crypto one day, probably in the not so distant future. Maybe 2 years, maybe 5 years, maybe this year, maybe 10 years. I don't know. Stick around long enough, you or your kids or your grandkids will not only be using it, they'll be living off of it. And if you do your research and you learn about it, maybe you'll never stack a big amount. Maybe you'll never be a millionaire. Maybe you'll never be wealthy. Who cares? That's not the point. You can secure a share of the financial future with crypto now at the rates that it's available compared to what it'll probably be available at in 5 or 10 years when there's far less supply available of Bitcoin. And the price will therefore be a lot higher when there's more demand for a thing that there's very little supply of. That's it. All right, Max Payne, I see your message. You want to drink vodka? Go have a good drink. All right, folks, take care. Happy days. Cheers.